The Liberal government is facing calls to intervene in an alleged serial murder case in Winnipeg. Police there say they won't search a landfill where the remains of two Indigenous women are believed to be after they were killed by the same man.
The Prime Minister admitted the crisis of murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit people was a genocide. Will he respond to these demands and make federal resources available now?
We see the level of pain, and the federal government will look to do whatever we can to support the province, the city, and whoever needs support in terms of giving closure and justice for these families.
Marco Mendicino is the Minister of Public Safety. He joins me now in the studio. Minister, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me back.
I understand you just had a phone conversation with the Winnipeg Police Chief. Is there an update on any developments on the search in this landfill?
Well, I did have a conversation with Chief Danny Smith from the Winnipeg Police Service. I've had other conversations, but right off the top, I do want to express our condolences to the families who continue to experience a profound sense of loss and trauma. This is a difficult time. One of the things that I have been expressing to our colleagues across government, including the RCMP, including to Chief Danny, is the need to give as much support and as compassion to the families as we possibly can, precisely because of the historical context in which this latest tragedy occurs, which goes back to residential schools. It includes MMIWG, more recently James Smith Cree Nation. Every time there is a tragedy like this, it re-traumatizes the community. And so to bridge that divide and to rebuild trust, we've got to support. And so the conversations today largely revolved around how we can offer support, whether it's through resources, technology, or feasibility. We'll be there to help.
So what support can you offer? Was there a conclusion in this conversation? We have a national police force with capacity in this sort of thing. Is there something the RCMP can do? Was there any firm offer of federal assistance out of this conversation?
We're exploring all of that, and yes, there was a very firm and concrete offer to help however we can. We also want to be sure that we are respectful of the trial right now, which is ongoing. And one of the things that the families no doubt want, that all Canadians want when there's a trial that involves a homicide, is justice. And so we need to make sure that as we communicate that to the families, that it's done in a way that is not presenting a barriers, but rather in ways in which we can facilitate those supports. So yes, today was principally about making sure that that Winnipeg and Manitoba knew that the federal government would be there if called upon.
Okay, if called upon, but here's the issue, right? Chief Danny Smith has faced a lot of criticism from people like Cambria Harris and Kira Harris, the daughters of Morgan Harris, for essentially saying that a hunt would be futile, a search would be futile of the landfill, and that the Winnipeg police have said they see no point. Did you get any impression today from the Winnipeg police that they're willing to change that position and that your offer of help moves them towards an actual search of the Prairie Green landfill?
I would say that I was encouraged by what Chief Danny Smith told me, which is that he was engaged with the community as recently as earlier today. I was also encouraged by some of the conversations that I had with my Manitoba counterpart, Minister Gertsen. I think everybody is very much attuned to the challenges and the frustrations of the families right now who want justice, who want closure, who deserve those things. But it has to be delivered in a way that is sensitive to Indigenous tradition and culture and consistent with the principles of reconciliation, which is, of course, something that we're committed to.
What's the particular sensitivity about a search for human remains in a landfill? I mean, the family says they want it. We've heard the Indigenous communities out there say that they want this to happen. I've even called for the federal government to cover the cost. So, I mean, what's the hurdle that needs to be overcome there to assist in a search?
Well, I think not unlike when there have been efforts to unearth the remains involving residential schools, there does need to be, I think, a culturally appropriate approach to the investigation, including if it involves a search of the landfill, which is precisely one of the other points that we emphasized today in our conversations with both Minister Gertsen as well as Chief Danny Smith. Look, we're committed to supporting however we possibly can. We know this is a very difficult moment. We know that there's a lot of anxiety and frustration over the loss of more Indigenous persons, and it's wrong. But we'll do whatever we can to ensure that there's justice.
Okay, the other issue I wanted to talk to you about was the move you made today on Bill C-21, which is the gun legislation, which has caused quite a headache, I think, for a lot of members of your caucus, particularly rural members. Well, you tried to reassure hunters today that you will handle these amendments in a way that doesn't affect their weapons that they feel should not be banned. Why did you feel the need to offer that clarity and reassurance today if you think your gun plan is the right one?
Well, look, we're, I think, very confident that we have the right objectives, which I think the vast majorities agree on, vast majority of Canadians agree on, which is that we're concerned with going after the military-style guns that exert the maximum amount of lethal force in the shortest period of time. There's no place for those guns in our communities, which is why we put in place the ban through an order in council in May of 2020. The debate that we're having right now revolves around the evergreen provision, which is a model agnostic provision that will alleviate some of the pressure and hopefully take some of the politics around cherry picking models and rather have a set of objective criteria on a go forward. It's important that we get the line right. And today, where we draw the boundaries around that, that evergreen provision, and today what we were signaling is we are going to take the time to make sure that we get it right. And that involves engaging with hunters, farmers, Indigenous peoples, and we have been doing that. Last week we met with AFN and we have been meeting with industry leaders. You'll recall the last time I was here, I told you about a good discussion that I had in my colleague Sophie Chattel's riding in Graceville. It's important that we continue to have those conversations because we know that they use those guns responsibly and safely, and we want to meet them where they are and bring them along in this important discussion.
Right, because the argument has been that rural guns don't cause urban crime, which is really the primary target for a lot of this. But I've been talking to a lot of staffers in your government, MPs in your government who insist that hunting rifles and shotguns and the sort of things that hunters use are not included in these amendments. But like the fact that you're doing this consultation and the opposition, is that not an admission that you've got some guns in there that maybe don't belong there based on how they're actually used culturally and for hunting?
Well, it's a 374-page amendment that entails a lot of important details, which is why we want to be sure that we get the language right and align it to the government's goals, which is, again, to go after the AR-15 style guns, which have been used in far too many tragedies in Nova Scotia and in Quebec. Not too long ago, we grieved with the victims of Polytechnique Institute. It's important that we are all motivated to do the right thing and to take the temperature down, to take away some of the disinformation and alleviate some of the confusion around the subject matter. We're going to take the time to get this right. I know the committee has committed to doing some additional study to hear from some additional experts. We embrace that. Me and my team and the government will do whatever we can to support that work so that parliamentarians of all political stripes can feel confident that the bill that we have put forward is going to achieve the goals that we want, which is to reduce gun crime, which is something that all Canadians can unite around.
You say you want to do the right thing, but haven't you kind of done this in the wrong way? But the way these amendments were done, that caused a lot of the confusion, that caused a lot of the disinformation. This was supposed to be a piece of legislation about handguns, and suddenly there's hundreds of pages of amendments about rifles that hunters say was a bait and switch from what they've been promised from your government. So, I mean, how much responsibility do the Liberals bear for how this is unfolded?
Well, I think that's precisely why today we wanted to say, one, we acknowledge that there have been some concerns expressed by hunters and farmers and Indigenous persons, and simply by saying that, we're signaling to all Canadians that we want to have a debate that is based on facts and not fear, so that we can ultimately land the bill in a place that completely aligns with the government's intention, which has been consistent and clear all along, which is to go after the guns which are too dangerous, the AR-15 style guns, and not in any way to infringe upon either those guns which are commonly used for hunting or Indigenous traditions.
So what's the process now then to have those consultations? Will you travel? Will it be private meetings? Will it just be renewed and expanded committee hearings? I mean, how do you get the information you need as minister on this to make sure you've struck that right balance and you don't have a bunch of angry hunters who are having a gun taken away from them they've used properly for their whole lives?
Well, first, support the committee however we can, and so that means making sure that we provide them with the information, the witnesses, the additional expert evidence that they need to make sure that they understand how the evergreen provision will work, to take a look at the lists which explicitly put into models the prohibited zone and to make any potential fine-tunings around that may be necessary. And yes, to continue to do the robust engagement that I have been doing over the course of the last number of months by speaking with hunters, by speaking with industry leaders, by speaking with Indigenous peoples, by speaking with law enforcement, and then making sure that when we land this legislation, which includes many other provisions, by the way, including a national handgun freeze, red flag, yellow flag provisions, more tools to help go after the hardened gun traffickers, all things which are good to make sure that we can pass this bill into law, because we've got to eradicate gun violence. It's a hard thing to do, but we're going to get there.
But just a final point before we let you go, on the long gun aspect of this, on the hunting rifle aspect, this is not just trying to clear up misunderstandings on your part. You're willing to compromise and change these amendments in a way to alleviate what you might consider to be reasonable concerns by hunters.
I think that's
correct?
precisely what we signaled today, is that there is a need to take the time to get it right, to make the fine-tuning that is necessary, and to ultimately satisfy parliamentarians and Canadians and bring them along in a debate that is responsible, that is civilized, and that is based on facts, not fear and disinformation, and I'm confident that we will get there.
Okay, Minister Mendicino, thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks.
That's Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino.